Proceed whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair and Representatives. My name is Earl Cox, and I'm with the Amalgamated Transit Union, ATU for short. I'm here in support of the bills. I primarily just wanted to point out that public transportation is a part of the Department of Transportation, and we've received money in the past, and I just wanted to lay out how important it is for public transportation to receive the full 10%. We are in support of the bills, but we'd like public transit to receive the full 10%. Just overall, and especially in my local in Kalamazoo, we have many issues hiring people and maintaining those that we have. Since 2020, over 50% of our staff, we have 125 employees. Over 50% of our staff are new employees, and our turnover rate is about 55% over the last 5 years as well. And so we have a revolving door going in. One of the main things that we face in hiring is finding people that are qualified to do the job. And then with the licensing requirements that we have, finding people that are willing to accept the job at the rate they're paid. We not only compete with other transit agencies, but we compete with local businesses across our county for employees. And so just being able to have the full amount, the 10% going into public transit would be very helpful for us under that local bus operating. Thank you, and I'm open for questions.
To build off of what Mr. Cox said, my name is Megan Owens. I'm the Director of Transportation, Riders United, a public transit advocacy organization. We work with public transit riders and supporters from all across the state. And for 75 years, the Michigan Transportation Fund has made essential investments in not only state roads, county roads, local roads, and airports, but also in local buses, in senior rides, in ferry boats, in trains, and in other transportation. And while understandably roads get the most attention, this other non-road infrastructure is also really critical to Michigan families, businesses, senior citizens, and all our communities. Because for the last 75 years, public transit agencies have been able to count on a portion of the state transportation funds to enable their operations, whether that's, again, ferry boats in the UP, the Silver Line in Grand Rapids, intercity buses linking communities, and especially the senior rides that every single community across the state that's critical for seniors. Together, they provide 45 million rides every year, and that's made possible because the Michigan Transportation Fund has dedicated to that, funding to that non-road transportation infrastructure. Per the state constitution, 90% of gas taxes go to roads, but that also has meant 10% can and should go to all of these other transportation services. And for decades, the non-road transportation did receive about 9.5%, less some administrative and other costs. That was until the road funding bills in 1997. They cut transit out of that traditional formula, dropping the non-road portion to roughly 8.5%. And then the road funding package in 2015 did something similar, dropping the non-road transportation funding down to about 7.5%. And as that state support has dropped, costs have shot up. The areas that transit agencies are working to serve have expanded. The number of seniors that need rides have increased. And that's left transit agencies to either raise local taxes if they can, or to ration, narrow, or even eliminate the services that your constituents are depending on. You have an opportunity with this package to decide when you decide how you invest in transportation. Unfortunately, the package before you today, as we calculated, out of $3 billion, it appears just 1.5% of that goes to all of the different non-road transportation needs. 1.5%. Last week, there were over 100 transit agency leaders and riders and workers from all across the state up here at the Capitol, met with most of your offices to share the way they serve your constituents and how important it is to restore that 10% of transportation investments into non-roads modes. Whether that's for seniors who want to remain in the homes they love without becoming a burden on their families, whether that's for 1 million Michiganders who have a disability that may impair their mobility or vision, but they want to be able to work, whether it's businesses who depend on employees to work even when their car doesn't. For all the Michiganders who depend on us, please amend this package to allocate 90% of the transportation funds for roads and 10% to non-road transportation.
Good afternoon. My name is John Dulmes, and I'm with the Michigan Public Transit Association, and I'm very glad to be joined here by Megan's group representing riders and Earl's group representing labor, and our association represents transit providers all across the state. We're also joined here by leaders from the Michigan Association Transportation Systems, which also represents some of the rural transportation providers and others in our state. And we just want to add our voice to others to illustrate the issue, educate on the all-time low share of state support that is going into public transit, even as we see demand increasing. We see aging population and we see younger populations at both ends of which are not driving as much as they used to. And we are facing a bus funding crisis, and that looks like reduced service hours, reduced days of operation, no rides on weekends, longer waits for a bus, a smaller service area, or prioritizing who can ride. Maybe a trip to a dialysis appointment, but maybe not to work that day in that community because of the funding. And we do estimate, ideally, under the current system, if we would fund the comprehensive transportation funding system, about $400 million would get us to full funding as Michigan law allows, despite which we've really dropped in recent years, the reimbursement share. And as Megan stated, this package, because of some of the impacts of where the funding is going directly to local roads, which is understandable in a sense, and also the effects of eliminating the sales taxes on fuels, it's only a net result of a $50 million increase for the CTF, which has to be further divided between aviation, ports, freight rail, passenger rail, intercity bus, transportation planning, before it also gets to local transit capital and local bus operating. So I would just urge you to look at some solutions. I will bring you a solution. One option, of course, to go through the formula of 10% to transit. There is also a revenue neutral proposal, a bill out there that was actually introduced last week, House Bill 4210, relating to the auto-related sales tax that would provide an additional $325 million gross increase to the CTF. We strongly encourage you to take a look at that legislation. We're glad to be part of the solution because we know that in Michigan, when we've seen transit services increase, the demand has increased in areas like western Oakland County, where ridership has doubled. Calhoun County, Battle Creek Go, where their demand for rides was 5 times what they were able to provide. And they are now moving forward with a new transit authority based on that pilot. The D2, A2, and the DAX buses, where again, ridership has doubled, where a new service has been offered. So again, I appreciate the time. I will also note, Earl did not mention it. Today is National Transit Employee Appreciation Day. I think he's in here on his day off, and we told him if he could come to Lansing to speak on it, it'd be greatly appreciated. We appreciate Earl and all the other transit employees across the state, and I thank you for your time.
Yep, thank you. And Earl, the House Transportation Committee, we appreciate you as well. I'll just say quickly, I know the primary focus of these bills are on road funding, but public transit is not lost from our minds. I have some dial-a rides in my district that are literally dying on the vine, and so we are going to work on a long-term solution to increase money to public transit, and we'll work on those solutions moving forward. But I do appreciate you guys' time and testimony. We're going to move on to questions, starting with Representative Steve Carra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the three of you for your testimony. I think my question's for John, but from any of the three of you would be fine. Are there any EV vehicles in the fleet for the buses statewide?
There have been some. Most of that has been federal grants. Some of that is currently in flux right now. I'll be very honest, the shift to EV has been pretty cautious. They don't work quite as well in a transit capacity as they do even on a school bus or a personal capacity. But again, most of that has been purchased through a specific federal grant that they may have received in the last couple of years. Typically is not coming out of the local budget.
Okay, and are they more expensive than the other buses?
I will say yes, they are. The full-size buses especially, I think we're seeing more of them maybe at the, they call it a ride to wellness, so where they could have a minivan or like a SUV or a car that can provide it. That tends to be a little better application for the EV as opposed to a 40-foot bus.
And my last quick question, if I may, Mr. Chair, is are they heavier than the other buses and therefore maybe putting more damage on the roads when they travel?
I'm actually not familiar with, I can find out. I'm not actually sure if we have any full-size EV buses in Michigan. We've had hydrogen, we've had propane. Maybe Megan knows.
In the Metro Detroit area, I believe there's 4. They were testing out to see how well they would work, under what conditions, but we can definitely check to see what the weight differential is.
Okay, thank you.
There's only a few.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Coons, do you still have a question?
I do, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you all. We could focus on percentage, but this is really about dollars. And under my understanding is public transit's going to get about $50 million more. And that's not acceptable? That's how could you be against a bill package that's going to fund you an additional $50 million?
Because the need is about $400 million. At least for myself, and I believe for John, we're currently neutral on this package. We are excited that this conversation is happening, and we know that there is enormous need for local road funding. What we're trying to communicate is there is also enormous need for local bus and senior shuttle funding, and yeah, an increase of $50 million gets us roughly back to where we were 3 years ago, even as costs have gone up. So we'd love to explore different ways to get to address the significant need. Whether it can be through this package would be wonderful, or if there are other ways to ensure that these services, as you said, aren't dying on the vine.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Representative Wirtz.
So based on that amount you just said, are you expecting us to subsidize the entire amount then of public transportation, or what are individuals, I guess, paying to take public transportation?
The public transportation is funded in a range of ways. Traditionally, the state has covered about half the costs. For rural areas, it's been up to 60%, and that way the local communities, between the riders and the businesses and any local taxes, cover about half of the costs. That, unfortunately, over the last 3 decades has dropped down to about 30 or 25% that the transit agencies across the state are getting from state dollars. So they used to be able to cover about half their budget from state revenue. They're now down to maybe a third or less. So we are asking to restore to that half, what we consider full funding, is 50% for the urban agencies, 60% for the rural agencies, as was the case for several decades.
Okay, what's the amount of people that are riding, of a percentage of population in Michigan that are using public transit?
I don't know the percentage of population. There are hundreds of thousands of people riding every day. And for many of these people, either if they didn't have it, they would not work, they would not go to school, they would not leave their homes. So it may be a relatively small portion of the population, but for them, it is a lifeline. So again, we want to make sure that seniors, when they retire from driving, when workers' car break down, that they can still get around.
Yeah, thanks. I can add also, appreciate the question. Certainly, I think the folks in this room are probably least representative of public transit users, being folks that are middle-aged, have the income to own a car, and can able to drive themselves to work. But for many people, either, again, the younger age or the older generations who may not have family living nearby, I think there's a lot of moms and dads whose kids are elsewhere, and they've seen these systems have a huge increase in the demand to help serve them. And some of the agencies that are joining me have seen actually record ridership in 2024. So, thank you.
For the sake of time, we are going to limit it to one more question. Moving on to Representative Frisbee.
When you talk about percentage of funding, what's the percentage of the ridership and the local contribution to mass transit combined? And if you could answer it separately.
I think typically the local share depends. It may be a millage. There's about 70, I think, local millages in the state. They pass at about a 90% rate. In your community, Calhoun County was one that actually passed a pretty significant millage in parts of the county. That being said, but to your point also, they may come from a rider that's paying their own fare. It may come from a school that's paying to transport pupils to an after-school program or to school itself. It may come from a hospital that's paying to get their patients there. There's a variety of people that pay for the rides. And typically, I'll just note that the cost of the ride is very insignificant compared to the cost of what they're riding for, whether it's a medical appointment, a school, education, or work.
And it's hard to say that because they're so dramatically different, from a Detroit Department of Transportation running 50 different bus routes to a small local provider. It could be, 20, 30, 40% coming from the 50% coming from the local community combined.
Well, thank you all for your testimony. Really much appreciated, and I look forward to working with you more in the future. Moving on to